Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast. Each week, your host, Casey Hasten, Director of Recruiting at VIP, will bring you valuable insights from thought leaders, introduce you to incredible companies, and bring you tips for landing your dream job from our team of executive recruiters at VIP. And now, Casey Hasten.
Welcome to the We Are VIP podcast, a podcast devoted to adding value to your career or candidate search, brought to you by VIP. I'm your host, Casey Hasten. I'm an executive recruiter, director of recruiting with VIP, and your all-around hiring guru. And you know, it is my desire each week to bring you amazing people that are going to give you insight and influence into how to live your fullest life. And today, I have got a doozy for you. You are going to love this guy. So today on the show, I'd like to welcome Chris Tuff, best-selling author of The Millennial Whisperer and Save Your Asks. Notice I said asks. Okay. Chris's mission is to put an end to the crisis of disconnection, solve the problem of the great resignation and quiet quitting all at once, all while increasing productivity and our ROI by bringing humility and humanity back into the business. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Casey. This is going to be fun. I'm excited.
I know. Before we get started, and you're going to have to help me with this, how did we get connected?
You know, I do not know. But I can tell you one thing, Casey. After we got off our initial meeting, I went and I turned to I think it was my wife that was in the other house. And I was like, that was so much fun. And I cannot wait to be on this podcast.
I know.
Because it was like, it was like an instant connection, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was so much energy going back and forth. And I just think that, was it Frank Agan?
Yes, that's who it was. That's exactly it.
All connections lead back to Frank somehow.
Yep.
It's amazing. So, but anyway, I love that. And I love that you were so open to that introduction and just really, and as I'm working with young professionals and young executives, that's one of the things that I try to teach them is, you need to be open to any connection because you never know where that connection is going to lead. And I love that you're already living that mindset and that you're just open, and look what happened. We get to be best friends now.
Exactly. No, I mean, and I think there's a massive disconnection happening right now. And I see it, I do about, I guess, a speech every week to many different types of organizations and audiences. And, we're missing this, right? It's a huge void that's happening that I want to have just a small impact in bringing people back together again. And what better way to demonstrate that than today with us?
I know. And me too. I want to, I talk about the collective whole all the time. And we are meant to be connected. We are meant to have that interaction, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. But we're not meant to be so separate from each other that we're miserable. And that's what causes us to be miserable. So I love that you're working on that connectedness. So first of all, I have to ask about your glasses. Tell me about your glasses.
So I talk about the importance of personal branding, right? Which is, the statistic that was brought up to me by the woman that wrote my foreword, Lydia Finette. Lydia is one of the most amazing women I've ever met. She's the head auctioneer at Christie's, and she was the one that, as we were going back and forth around my book, Save Your Asks, she said, so Chris, there is a massive problem out there in that when I'm at these auctions and I'm sharing the stage with either Bruce Springsteen or Bruce Willis, you got to stand out, right? And then it comes time for us to sit around that table. We've all been at that table at those networking events or the nonprofit. She said, Chris, only 5% of those people around the table are actually memorable. So what are you doing to set yourself apart? What are the stories that you're telling? And what are the questions that you are asking? And then also, it helps with with the whole appearance thing, right? And so I started off with white glasses and then ended up getting graduating into the yellow glasses because my optimistic kind of viewpoint, I want to bring light into every situation and conversation and connection.
I love that so much. I have a friend that, in fact, he just rebranded his company because he started wearing a red hat everywhere he went. And so now his company, he rebranded it because everybody started coming up to him. They're like, I heard about the guy in the red hat. And you were so easy to find because he's tall, number one, but he had a red hat. He always wore a red hat. And so he renamed his company Red Hat Media.
Yeah, I love it.
And
I
that's
love
his
it.
brand.
And just I'll tell audiences, like, I didn't start off with ridiculous glasses. I had when cool socks. You remember in like 2012 or so, everyone was wearing like those super bright, cool socks. I'd invested in a company that actually ended up going under, but I bought $3,000 worth of socks. And so instead of giving away a business card, I would actually give away a pair of these socks just for trialing, right? Just to get people to trial them. And it was always like 6 months, a year later that I'd be running into these people and they're like, oh my gosh, Chris, Tuff, you're the sock guy. And then they'd go down and be like, I'm actually wearing them right now, right? So just doing something different is so important. And then also these conversation starters, right? And, whether it be my glasses or, my tattoos, or I wear a lot of bright Jordan 1s, it always breaks kind of that ice where people will go out of their way. Even this morning, I was meeting with a guy for coffee, and 3 people came by as we were meeting saying, I love your glasses. Like, tell me more about them. And then I'll bring my book up. I'm like, actually, it's part of my brand. Right. And so, yeah, it is kind of like that eye-catching thing, and also a representation of we need more light in this world. We need more optimism and brightness. And what better way to capture that than bright yellow?
Makes me smile every time I see it. So
Right.
For sure. So, okay. So before we get into the questions, I mean, there's a reason why you are qualified to speak on what you qualified. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your previous experience with work and stuff.
Sure. A lot of speakers, it's interesting. As I talk to potential companies that might hire me for a speech, I say there's generally 2 types of speakers out there, right? And there's the entertainers, right? The entertainers are the ones that have like climbed Mount Everest 7 times, and it's super entertaining and in the moment. But at the end of the day, when it comes time for like a Delta Airlines, what does this mean about selling more seats on airplanes, right? Like climbing Mount Everest. And then, and so it's kind of like one and done. And then you've got the professors, and the professors come in and they're super studious on all the statistics and everything. And they tend to be a little bit boring, and but they don't have that tangible work knowledge, right? And what I try to do is I try to bridge both of those worlds with using real data, up-to-date data, but then also memorable stories that people can walk away and implement immediately. And really, a lot of that comes from my background and obsession with connection from the early days of social and digital media. I actually fell into what ended up being Facebook, working directly with the original kind of crew at Facebook, and went from the 13th employee of a digital advertising firm. We grew to 500, and I really ran with that social media piece around bringing the world together and using these mediums to create more of that connection. And then it was off to the races. And I had a failed startup, then ended up at where I left in January, a privately held advertising agency that we grew to, I think we tripled in size. I helped really push us into the digital realm. Took us from 3% digital revenue to, I think, 87% when I left. And I became the digital and social guy, but really the rainmaker, right? Mm-hmm. And so companies would reach out to me, and then I would court them and do the sales thing, and then bring them in with more of a business development role. And that's when I left, was after obviously publishing my first book 4 years ago, and I had to kind of go and spread my wings and fly to have the impact that I have set a lofty goal around.
I love that. And I just want to point this out because you've said it twice. You say it, you just throw it out there and you just go by it. But you've said it twice that, like, I started a sock business, and it failed. And then you just went on, but I gave away socks. And then you just again said, I had a failed startup with a smile on your face and went on. I think that is so incredible that that doesn't seem to scare you at all, failure.
Sure. And I have what I call my 2-hour rule. And, what the 2-hour rule is that you can't dwell on anything that doesn't go your way for more than 2 hours, is in my boat, right? It's the name of the game. We live in a society of instant everything. And even if you look at some of the generational differences that we're seeing between boomers, Xers, and really the younger millennials and Gen Zers, the younger you get, the more of an expectation that instant results are there. And one thing that I emphasize is that the two key characteristics to really break through and pursue these things that are in our passions and dreams, it takes a lot of tenacity and resilience. And that resilience muscle is best demonstrated by my 2-hour rule. And I mean, it's actually what got me to write Save Your Asks, because when I sold 100,000 copies of the Millennial Whisperer, I was speaking on stages at Nike, etc. And then the pandemic hit, and it was actually a phone call from the president of Nike's assistant called me and was like, Chris, that speech that you're supposed to do in 3 weeks, we got to cancel it. The world's coming to a absolute halt. And we don't know when or if it's going to be rescheduled. And so I followed my 2-hour rule, and I was like, all right, that stinks, right? And then I'm like, all right, what is the book that I don't know how long this pandemic's going to last, but what's the book that I was really born to write? Is it The Millennial Whisperer and the Importance of Connection Internally? Probably not. The book that I was born to write was really around networking and sales. That's what most people come to me for. And I had done a guest lecture 3 years prior to that at Vanderbilt, and it was the highest rated guest lecture by the senior class. And the title of it was How to Network Like a Mofo. And I was like, there's the foundation of it. And then I'll spend however long this pandemic lasts, I'll just interview the world's best networkers, and I'll use it as an ability, use it in my ability to connect with those people. And I wrote the Millennial Whisperer in 4.5 months, and I had an amazing team of editors, including my older sister, Sarah. And then for Save Your Asks, I never wanted to end because I kept meeting new, amazing people from all walks of life, pro surfers, billionaires, and hardwood flooring entrepreneurs, right? And I was like, I don't want this to stop, but I got to bring this in for a landing at some point. And so, obviously the product is now what Save Your Asks represents. So, it's been wild, but that resilience and tenacity thing, we've got to be able to bounce back from the things that fail. And I obviously I have a high appetite for risk, but I diversify myself in many different things to alleviate any one dependence on a single success, right? So I've got really 6 companies right now that are all at different stages. It's like, well, a couple of these are going to work.
I think it's so interesting because typically you'll see that keynote speakers like yourself will kind of focus in on 2, maybe 3 topics. And I'm going to just look at this list here that I have of all the topics you speak on. So recruitment, retention, networking, leadership, company culture, sales tactics, multi-generational workforce, increasing lead conversion. So of all these topics that you cover, I'm curious, what seems to be the hottest topic people want to discuss right now and why?
It's people's greatest pain point right now is retention and attraction. And that's the reality is doesn't matter whether it's dental offices, optometrists, health systems. I just was actually brought into a health system with 36,000 employees, most of them obviously nurses, and 78% millennial and Gen Z. And they called me because they Googled I guess they just Googled who can help us with this millennial and Gen Z issue, because they've got a 25% attrition rate. And so for each one of those, you can do the math pretty quickly, right? I mean, they're losing over $1 billion in this turnover. And they brought me in to look at this stuff through a new lens. And it was one of the most, one of those, I'd say 50% of my speeches, I get like teary-eyed and goosebumpy, right? And which is special. And especially doing them every week. And this was one of those moments where I was able to, in a very short amount of time, say, all right, listen, I went through your data. I then put it up against all of this research. Here are 3 things that you can start implementing immediately that costs $0, that will take that attrition rate down by at least a couple percentage points. And by the way, if it goes down 3 percentage points, I did the math, it's like $38 million in savings. And really, and once again, doing it in an aspiring and approachable way that, like, you're not going to have a super deep impact on a broad scale. But what I tell audiences is just take 2 things from today that you're inspired around and implement them and see what it does, right? And that's where the magic happens.
So, okay, so we're talking about attracting and retention too, and we've heard about this great resignation and this quiet quitting, and, you know, and companies are really trying to find ways to attract and retain top talent. So I'd be really curious to hear what those 3 things were, or maybe if you can only share 1 or 2 that you said you can do right now and it cost you $0. Sure. But also, what are the common mistakes have you seen that these companies are making?
Well, the thing I run up against the most is the mentality of, well, I had to do it this way, why don't they? Right. And once we kind of can get that out of the scenario, it's like we've got to start adapting. And I'm not saying that any one generation is right. What I am saying is, as humans, we all have the same desires, that we want to be loved, accepted, acknowledged, and doing something that is meaningful in our day-to-day. What is it that our work is actually contributing towards, right? And so it comes down to the underlying theme of everything is connection, authentic, genuine connection. And the other big thing that has changed in the workforce, and there's a couple reasons why it's changed, but the expectation of both millennials, mid-millennials, so 35 and under, is that passions will be itched at your organization. Whereas, like, you talk to boomers and Xers, they're like, no, you go to the golf course on the weekend to itch that passion. That's what hobbies are for. But the younger you get, the more of that expectation is in place. And then the other thing is what they're craving from leadership is much more, sure, a boss, but much more a mentor and coach. Yeah. And that comes from how a lot of these millennials and Gen Zers were parented, because I love to use the juxtaposition of just a dinner table conversation. And for me, I'm 42 years old. I'm right on the cusp, but I had a very British authoritarian father growing up. And when I sat down at the dinner table, it was, Christopher, how are your grades? Are they good enough for the best schools? What is it that you're thinking about working towards, right? It was very authoritarian. It was like basically get in line, right? You juxtapose that to especially mid-millennials, 35 all the way younger, to the Gen Zers now, 25 and younger. And they're out with their parents playing beer pong, ripping on a Juul, talking about who they hooked up with and like what's going on in their personal life. And what happens is then when these young people come to our organization, they're looking to you with that same parental figure, and they're craving that interpersonal connection that they had with their parents. And the other big contributing factor to all of this is social media, right? And there is a reality to the fact that social media has made a more needy generation, right? So rewards and recognition is much more important to millennials and Gen Zers than it ever was to Xers and boomers, but also that interpersonal muscle that boomers and Xers were able to practice, like I talk about, to flirt with someone, I had to pick up a phone. I had to get through mom and dad, and then I always had a list of all the things that I would say to the person on the other line, and I usually didn't do a great job.
Quick question. Did you have call waiting?
Oh, we did have call waiting.
And do you remember busy signals?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And I would dial nonstop until I got through.
And
yes.
Did you have star 69?
Yes.
Like if somebody called you and you missed it, you're like, I can't stand it. Who was it? Because we didn't have caller
And I didn't
ID.
even have a cell. I mean, look at, I had a beeper in college, right? I didn't get my first cell phone until right after college. And so it creates this environment that is so different. And what I really then, if I were to cull it down to the three biggest things, it's opening our interpretation of work flexibility. All right. And what I mean by that is it's not just working from where you want to work. And I am one of the greatest advocates on we've got to bring people back together, right? This solely hybrid working from Zoom all day is not going to work. But I'm also suggesting that doesn't have to be, it's not that we have to always be back in the office unless it's more of a trade type role that we're filling there. And so I look at, if it's an individual contributor, let's just say it's someone that is like a software engineer. Let them write their code wherever they want to get in that flow space. But when it's time to tell everyone where it is that you're going from a strategy perspective or sharing what's happening, we got to bring people back together. So it's more of a hive type mentality. And then there's obviously all of the manufacturing and those hourly employees that you just got to be where you are going to be working, right? And but what I suggest is I tell a story, Casey, about there's a company out in California, and in speeches I'll have the audience guess the company, but what they do is on your 1-year work anniversary, you are allowed to create your own job description with the caveat that if you sell it into everyone else on your team, you can then start doing that job. They have a 99% retention rate. And I'll ask audiences, what company do you think it is? And the answers they're always like, oh, it's probably Uber or, Facebook or, one of these tech companies. I go, no, it's Morningstar Tomato Farms in their tomato paste factories. And work flexibility is opening our minds to allowing our employees to choose more of their own adventure. And we all have shifting passions and purpose. And as young people, we don't know necessarily where that is until we're in that organization, which then leads into a lot of times when I dissect the data, allow people to make lateral job moves don't make it so difficult for them to do that. Because, I'm a good example. It took 5 lateral job moves in very different departments before I actually fell into the thing that I really thrived at. And then the other pieces, so the tactics I talk about, so that's work flexibility, right? And then the other ones are really around leadership. And the 3 most important traits for leaders today through the eyes of millennials and Gen Zers are 1, inspirational leadership, 2, autonomy, and 3, transparency, right? And if you can nail down those 3, you will excel.
That was a lot to dissect, but and I do want to talk a little bit because the millennials have gotten kind of a bad reputation, right? They're seen as lazy, selfish, disloyal. How did they get this reputation, and how do we correct this perception of them?
Yeah, it's more of what's happened around millennials and within our workforce, right? And it's for the first time ever, we have 2 generations, millennials and Gen Zers, that if we don't meet them somewhere on their own terms, they're going to leave and they're going to move in with mom and dad, right? And without a job. And they'll go to the gig economy and juggle a handful of things until they figure out the next thing. But, the other side of it is there is a reality to some of these bad reputation pieces, right? That they're needy. I have friends that they're like, Chris, like, I don't even know what to do anymore because, I'm having to give job promotions every 6 months. They're holding me hostage because they're getting these job offers and then I have to counter it. And it's created this crazy inflation with the salary. And I'm like, listen, because you're throwing money at the wrong things, right? Why we are so dependent on those things. That's just a sign that there's not enough rewards and recognition within your infrastructure. So you need a top-down reward, right? And so what are you doing on a quarterly or annual basis to reward people, sometimes monthly? And then a peer-to-peer recognition to fill that bucket and need for that fulfillment. Because what's happened, and I explain this with lots of stories, but this generation, anytime they wanted that, first of all, they got participation trophies at every single turn, right? And then anytime they wanted that gratification, they posted to social media and they got it. And so how is it we've got to teach them? I will teach, these companies that on their first week, sit down with those people on your team and teach them what I call the 70-30 rule. And the 70-30 rule is that 30% of your job is just going to suck. That is life. 70% should get you excited and be in your zone of excellence. And it is my job as your leader to make sure that that stays around the same percentage to each. Now, one of the keys that's going to happen is that all your friends are full of crap, right? Because they're posting this beautiful, perfect life to Instagram. And when you're out at the bars with them, they're also saying that they have this glamorous life, whereas in reality, they don't. So the grass is not always greener on the other side. So sit down with your job description and figure out, tell me what is in your 70% zone of awesomeness, and then what's in your 30% zone of suck. And what happens with that exercise is that after 3 days of going through the grind, I mean, for me, it's anything in Excel is in my 30% zone of suck, right? Same. Numbers, budgeting. And when you go through 3 days of it, you're just powering through to get to the other side. And so those are the things that I help companies kind of wrap their head around and embrace.
I really love that. I really do. And we were almost out of time here, but I want to ask you another question before we get to our VIP questions. And it's surrounding, as a recruiter, I work with people of all ages, right? And so do you see age to be a factor in the hiring patterns that you're seeing? I mean, what are the patterns for millennials versus boomers?
Yeah, I mean, once again, millennials are bouncing around a lot more. And, they're using the advantage of getting offers from other places to then get a bump in their salary. And really that is indicative of a bad culture. And so you got to clean up your culture. Once you have a great culture, it's up to leadership to I'll say that to teams, like I won't negotiate with terrorists. So if you go and get a job offer from another company, I'm going to tell you in that moment that you can leave because I'm not going to counter it, right? When you draw a line in the sand, you avoid any future conflicts there, right? And so a lot of times companies think that culture is great and that it's, somewhere on their website and values. Culture comes from your people. It's up to leadership to help direct it, but it's really going to come from having amazing people that you as a leader need to bring out of them. And that's where I focus a lot of my time and efforts.
I love that. Okay. Now we're going to get to the VIP questions. Are you ready?
Bring it.
Okay. If you were chosen to be one of the first people on Mars, what 3 things or people would you take with you?
I would take, am I allowed to bring my family?
You would. Family is that 1 or is that how many are in your family?
There's 2 daughters and a wife. I mean, that is the center of my kind of universe. So, okay, let's make it more fun because that's too easy. I would take a notebook so I can write down all of my thinking and gratitude journal and do all that stuff, right? Yep. So that's number 1. I would bring music because it's the easiest thing to actually get me into or out, into the right zone. And then I would bring a smell. And because up in space, first of all, they don't have smells and we don't focus enough on smells. All right. And what I do is I actually timestamp my life with smells. And so every month I have a different smell. Right now I have Vanilla 44 by Le Labo. And what I'll do after the month is done, I put it up on my memory bank. And I can revisit that time in my life using that smell to bring me back. And one of the most astounding things in this experiment, even when I'm going through really tough times, when I revisit that smell 4 months later, I'll like yell to my wife, Julie, like they're good memories already. Like I actually have good memories of, slogging through the final parts of writing Savior Asks, for example, right? And so that to me, I'm an artist, and that to me, if I can have those pieces, if I'm especially on my own, which would be interesting unto itself because I'm never alone, that's what I would bring.
Okay, I have to just add something to that real quick about your whole smell thing.
Yeah.
We just moved into a new office, and it's like a brand new office building. And I swear to God, something's dyed up in the ceiling.
Ha! Yeah,
And the smell
you got
is
to take care
horrible.
of.
So
You
I
gotta
will
take care
always
of it.
remember that smell and that memory. So, okay, question number 2. What is one thing you do each morning to set your day up for success?
So for me, it's naming 3 things that I'm grateful for as soon as I get out of bed, even if that's tough. And then I got to get moving. And as much as I wake up at 4:45 in the morning, and I hate lifting weights and going to the gym. I hate it, but I do it. I do it with a trainer because that's the only way I'll do it. And I do that on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. The other days I do something more cardio, but I find that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I get in the flow state much longer, right? And today's one of those days, and it was leg day, right? So I'd probably not have near as much energy at this time in the day had I not done that. So it really sets my day up right, but also allows me to have, that adrenaline and momentum going into the day.
Plus, you're taking care of your health.
Yeah.
We don't want to do it, not all of us, but it's a necessary evil, right? You got to get that movement, got to get the body moving. Okay, so my final question for you. If your life's work was being summarized in a news article, what would the headline be?
The guy that helped uncover a million dreams. Yeah.
Mine can be one of them.
Yes. And that's my purpose. My purpose used to just be to inspire and connect. And I've refined that in the last couple months to uncover dreams and passions and be the catalyst. And that's essentially what I do all day, every day. And what gives me the most energy is when I can sit across from someone and do that.
I love that. I feel your heart so strong. I really do. How do other people find you so they can feel your heart as well?
Yeah. The best place to go is probably on either Instagram. So that's Tuff22, TUFF22. You can go to my website, christuff.me, and then hit me up on LinkedIn /Christopher Tuff.
I love that. This has been so much fun. And I'm so excited that we managed to arrange a time for you to come to Dallas to speak to us in person.
Yes.
In December.
Yes.
So anybody that wants to learn more about that, you can reach out to me or someone on my team, and we will share the details on that because we're really, really excited about that. But for now, I just have one last thing to say to you, Chris. You are a VIP.
I appreciate it,
And
Casey.
that's a wrap for today. Join us next week here on the We Are VIP podcast. We'd love to know how we can help you be a VIP. To find out more, log on to wearevip.com.